There are moments in life that don't break us loudly, but change everything. My name is Margaret Wilson. I used to live in Savannah, Georgia, in a quiet little blue house that once felt full of life. The living room was always warm. There was a soft cream-colored couch near the fireplace, flower curtains by the windows, and my husband Thomas's old rocking chair sitting in the same corner for nearly 40 years. Every photo on those walls carried a memory: birthdays, Christmas mornings, little footsteps running across the wooden floor, laughter, so much laughter, and now, sometimes, all I hear is silence. I never imagined growing old would feel this lonely, not after spending my whole life taking care of everyone else, not after raising children with love, sacrifice, and prayer, not after standing beside my husband through every difficult season life gave us. But pain changes shape when you grow older. When you are young, pain is loud. When you are old, pain becomes quiet. It sits beside you at dinner. It follows you into empty rooms. It waits beside your bed at night. And sometimes, it wears the face of the people you love most. My son Andrew used to call me every single Sunday after church. "Morning, Mom," he would say with that same gentle voice he had as a little boy. And every time I heard him, my heart felt safe. But life changes people. Marriage changes routines. Children grow busy, and slowly, without anyone meaning to, you begin to feel like you are standing outside a window, watching everyone else go on with their lives without you. That feeling started the year after my husband died. Thomas passed away one winter morning, heart failure. One moment he was sitting in his favorite chair watching the news, and the next moment my world became unbearably still. People bring flowers at first, neighbors bring casseroles. Family members hug you tightly. Everyone says, "If you need anything, call me." But eventually, the house becomes quiet again, too quiet, and that is when grief truly begins. After the funeral, Andrew and his wife, Caroline, asked me to move closer to them in Nashville. "You shouldn't live alone anymore," Andrew told me softly, and at that moment, part of me felt relieved. I thought maybe being near family would help heal the emptiness. I thought laughter would return. I thought love would make everything easier. I did not realize that sometimes, even inside a full house, a person can still feel completely alone. The first few weeks were peaceful enough. Caroline gave me the guest room near the hallway. The grandchildren hugged me every morning, and Andrew checked on me after work. I kept telling myself, "Margaret, be grateful, don't complain." Families are adjusting, so I stayed helpful. I folded laundry, I cleaned counters, I cooked meals. That is what mothers do, isn't it? We help, we care, we hold families together, but little by little. I started noticing something in Caroline's eyes. Not anger, not cruelty, just discomfort as my presence changed the air inside her home. One morning I woke early and made breakfast for everyone. Pancakes, eggs, fresh biscuits. The kind of breakfast Andrew loved as a child. When Caroline walked into the kitchen, she stopped for a moment, then she forced a small smile. "Oh, you didn't have to do all this," she said. "I wanted to help," I answered. She nodded politely, but something still felt heavy. That feeling stayed with me the entire day, and strangely enough, it reminded me of something my mother once told me many years ago. "Margaret," she said, "sometimes people can love you and still not know where to place you in their life." Back then, I never understood what she meant. Now I did. At dinner that night, everyone talked around me. Andrew spoke about work. Caroline talked about school schedules. The children laughed at cartoons, and me, I sat there smiling, holding my coffee cup with both hands, trying not to feel invisible. Nobody was being intentionally cruel. That is what made the pain harder to explain. Sometimes people do not wound you with words. Sometimes they wound you with absence, with distance, with silence. After dinner, I carried plates into the kitchen alone. I could hear the television from the living room. Laughter, conversation, life continuing, and suddenly, I realized nobody had noticed I left the table. I stood at the sink staring into the dark kitchen window. My reflection looked tired, older than I remembered, and for the first time in my entire life, I asked myself a question that terrified me. If a mother is no longer needed, where does she belong? That night, I sat alone in the guest room holding Thomas's old Bible against my chest. I whispered through tears, "Lord, please don't let me become a burden to my own family." I cried into the darkness, not loud, not dramatic, just the crying older women learn to hide from everyone else. Because after a certain age, people expect you to endure pain silently. I wish I could tell you things became better immediately, but they didn't. In fact, what happened a few weeks later at a family dinner changed everything between Caroline and me forever. And truthfully, that was the night I truly started believing I no longer belonged anywhere at all. Before loneliness entered my life, before silence started following me from room twos, there was joy, real joy, the kind that fills a home so completely, you think it will last forever. Back in Savannah, our little house was never fancy. The carpet was worn in places. The kitchen cabinets squeaked every time they opened, and the living room couch had a small tear near the armrest that Thomas always promised to fix. But to me, that house felt like heaven. Every evening, Thomas would sit in his rocking chair beside the fireplace with a cup of coffee balanced on his knee. The television would play softly in the background while I folded laundry nearby. Sometimes we talked for hours. Sometimes we sat together in comfortable silence. That kind of silence is different. It feels safe, warm, loved. I miss that kind of silence. Thomas was not a rich man. He worked long hours at the shipping warehouse near the Savannah docks for more than 30 years. His hands were rough, his back hurt most evenings, but he never complained much. God gave us enough, he always said, and somehow, he made even ordinary days feel meaningful. Every Friday night, he brought home a small peach pie from the same bakery downtown. Every Sunday morning, he ironed his church shirt while humming old gospel songs. And every single night before bed, he kissed my forehead and whispered, "We made it through another day, Maggie." No matter how difficult life became, those words always made me feel safe. When Andrew was little, he adored his father. He followed Thomas everywhere, through the garage, through the backyard, even to churchmen's breakfasts early Saturday mornings. Thomas used to laugh and say, "That boy's my shadow," and deep down, Andrew had the gentlest heart. Even as a child, if he saw someone sitting alone at church, he would walk over and speak to them. If I looked tired, he noticed immediately. Sometimes I still remember his little voice saying, "You okay, Mom?" Funny how mothers spend years protecting their children. And then one day, they become the ones hoping their children still see them too. The first time Andrew brought Caroline home, I tried very hard to make her feel welcome. I still remember that evening clearly. The living room smelled like cinnamon candles and fresh cornbread. Rain tapped softly against the windows, and I must have rearranged those couch pillows 10 different times from nervousness. I wanted everything perfect. Because when your child falls in love, part of your heart becomes afraid. Not afraid of losing love completely, just afraid of becoming less important. Caroline walked into the house wearing a soft gray sweater and holding a small pie from a bakery. She looked nervous, polite, careful with every word. Thomas welcomed her warmly right away. "Well now," he laughed, "any woman bringing dessert into this house is already family." Caroline smiled nervously. Andrew looked happier than I had seen him in years, and looking back, that was enough for me. A mother only wants to know her child is loved. That evening, we all sat around the dining table talking for hours. Thomas told embarrassing childhood stories about Andrew. Andrew kept shaking his head, saying, "Dad, please stop." And Caroline laughed harder each time. I remember sitting there, watching all of them together, and for a moment, I truly believed our family was only growing bigger, not changing, not drifting apart, just growing. But life has a way of teaching painful lessons slowly. Marriage changes rhythms inside a family. A son becomes a husband. A mother becomes someone standing a little farther away, and if you're not careful, you can spend years pretending that distance does not hurt. The wedding happened 2 years later. Small church, simple flowers, soft music. I cried through nearly the entire ceremony. Thomas squeezed my hand gently and whispered, "You did well, Maggie." I smiled through tears because deep down, I believed him. We had raised a kind son, a loving son. And watching him start his own family felt beautiful, at least in the beginning. Nobody warns mothers about what comes after the wedding. Nobody talks about the quiet grief that sometimes follows. Not because your child stops loving you, but because their world no longer revolves around you. And that is natural, healthy even still. Knowing something in your mind does not stop your heart from aching. Years passed quickly after that. Andrew and Caroline built their own routines, their own traditions, their own little family world. Phone calls became shorter, visits became less frequent, holidays changed, slowly, without anyone planning for it. Then one winter morning, everything changed forever. Thomas died. Even now, saying those words hurts. After 43 years of marriage, the house suddenly felt unbearably empty. His rocking chair stayed still. His coffee mug sat untouched near the sink, and the living room that once held so much laughter became painfully silent. I remember waking up one night, reaching across the bed for him. My hand touched cold sheets instead. That was the moment grief became real. Not during the funeral, not during the prayers, not during the casseroles neighbors brought over. No, grief became real when life kept moving. And the person you loved most no longer moved with it. A few weeks later, Andrew drove down from Nashville to see me. He sat beside me in the living room while evening sunlight came through the curtains. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "Mom, come stay with us for a while." I looked around the room slowly, at Thomas's chair, at our family photos, at the walls that had carried our entire life together. Part of me wanted to stay forever, but another part of me was terrified of being alone. So eventually, I nodded. And that decision changed all of our lives more than any of us expected, because what began as love, slowly tension became apparent. What began as comfort slowly became distant. And what happened inside Andrew and Caroline's home over the next several months. It would leave me questioning whether love alone is always enough to hold a family together. The day I moved into Andrew and Caroline's home, I kept telling myself it was temporary, just a little time together while my heart healed, just until the loneliness became easier to carry. That is what I told everyone. But deep inside, I think I already knew something had changed forever. Leaving Savannah was harder than I expected. The morning I packed my final box, I stood alone in the living room staring at Thomas's empty rocking chair. Sunlight touched the armrest exactly the way it used to every morning. For a second, I almost imagined he was still there, waiting for coffee, waiting for me. But grief plays tricks like that. Sometimes love remains so strong. Your heart refuses to believe someone is truly gone. Before leaving, I walked through every room one last time. The kitchen, the hallway, the bedroom we shared for 43 years. And then I whispered, "Goodbye, old house." But what hurt most was, it felt more like I was saying goodbye to myself. Andrew hugged me tightly when we arrived in Nashville. "Mom, you're home now," he said warmly, and for a moment, I believed him. Caroline had prepared the guest room beautifully. Fresh flowers beside the bed, clean blankets, a framed family photo on the nightstand. She had clearly made an effort, and I appreciated that more than she probably realized. The grandchildren were excited too. Emma grabbed my hand immediately. "Grandma, your room is next to mine." Jacob dragged my suitcase halfway down the hallway before nearly falling over. For the first few days, the house felt alive again, full of movement, full of noise, and after months of grieving alone, that noise comforted me. Every morning I woke early out of habit. Older women rarely sleep late. I would make coffee before everyone else woke up. Then I would sit in the living room watching sunlight slowly fill the house. The living room in Andrew's home was more modern than ours in Savannah. Gray couches, large television, white shelves with carefully arranged decorations. Everything looked clean, organized, almost untouched. Not like my old living room where blankets stayed unfolded and family photos filled every corner. Still, I tried to make myself comfortable there. I truly did. At first, I helped with little things around the house. Folding towels, loading dishes, packing school lunches, simple things, the kind of things mothers do without thinking. One morning, while I was wiping the kitchen counters, Caroline walked in wearing her work clothes. She stopped when she saw me cleaning. "Oh, Margaret, you really don't need to do that." I smiled softly. "I don't mind helping," she nodded politely, but something in her face tightened for just a second. Something small, almost invisible. Still, I noticed it. That became the pattern every time I tried helping. Caroline seemed uncomfortable, not angry, never openly rude, just uneasy. If I folded laundry, she quietly redid it later. If I organized cabinets, things mysteriously moved back. If I cooked dinner, she thanked me politely, but looked stressed the entire evening. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe grief had made me sensitive, so I stayed quiet. That is what older women often do. We silence ourselves to keep peace inside the family, even when our hearts are hurting. One evening, Andrew came home from work late, exhausted. I reheated soup for him while Caroline helped the children with homework. As he sat at the kitchen table eating, he smiled at me. "This tastes just like childhood," he said softly, and for the first time in days, I felt useful again, needed again. But then I glanced toward Caroline. She was standing in the hallway watching us silently, not angry, not smiling either, just watching. And suddenly, guilt settled heavily inside my chest, because without meaning to, I think I had stepped into spaces that no longer belonged to me. That realization hurt more than I can explain. You spend your entire life being the center of your child's world. Then one day, you realize someone else now carries that role. And no matter how much you love them, part of your heart grieves the change. As weeks passed, I slowly became smaller inside the house. I talked less during dinner. I stayed longer in my room. I stopped offering opinions. And strangely, nobody seemed to notice. That was the hardest part. Not cruelty, not fighting, just invisibility. One rainy afternoon, I overheard something I do not think Caroline meant for me to hear. She was speaking softly to Andrew in their bedroom while I folded towels nearby. "I just miss having our own space," she whispered. The room became quiet, then Andrew answered carefully, "She's still grieving, Caroline." "I know," she said softly. "I feel bad even saying it, but sometimes I feel like I can't fully relax anymore." I froze completely. The towels slipped from my hands onto the floor. My chest tightened so suddenly, I could barely breathe because deep down, I already feared that was how she felt, and hearing it out loud made the fear real. That evening, I barely touched my dinner. Andrew noticed immediately. "You okay, Mom?" I forced a smile. "Just tired." But grief and loneliness create a special kind of exhaustion, the kind sleep cannot fix. After dinner, I sat alone in the guest room holding Thomas's old Bible again. I kept replaying Caroline's words in my mind. I can't fully relax anymore, and suddenly, I no longer felt like family. I felt like an interruption, a reminder of loss living down the hallway. That night, I prayed harder than I had prayed in years. Lord, please help me understand where I belong now, because that was the real pain, not aging. Not widowhood, not even loneliness. The real pain was feeling unwanted in the very place you hoped would heal you. The next morning, I decided on something inside my heart. If my presence made life harder for them, then I would find it easier to live around. So I stopped helping as much, stopped speaking first, stopped inserting myself into conversations. I became careful, too careful, and slowly. The silence inside me grew heavier every single day. But what none of us realized then was this: the quiet distance growing inside that house was leading us toward a moment none of us were prepared for. A moment that would finally force every hidden feeling into the open. And when it happened, nothing inside our family would feel the same again. By the time Thanksgiving arrived, the tension inside the house had become impossible to ignore. Not loud tension, not shouting, worse than that, quiet tension. The kind that lives underneath polite smiles and careful conversations. The kind everyone feels, but nobody talks about. Thanksgiving used to be my favorite holiday. Back in Savannah, our home would smell like turkey, cinnamon, fresh bread, and sweet potato pie from sunrise until late evening. Thomas always played old gospel music while pretending to help in the kitchen. Mostly, he just stole pieces of turkey when he thought I wasn't looking. And every single year, before dinner began, he held my hand under the table during prayer. Even now, I can still feel his fingers squeezing mine. That year in Nashville, I desperately wanted the holiday to feel warm again, normal again. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I was trying too hard to recreate something that no longer existed. I woke before sunrise that morning. The house was still dark and quiet. I stood alone in the kitchen for a long moment, listening to the refrigerator hum softly. Then I tied on my apron and started cooking. Turkey, cornbread dressing, green beans, sweet tea, apple pie, all the old family recipes. The same recipes Andrew grew up loving, and honestly, for the first time in months. I felt alive again, useful again, like maybe I still had a place in this family after all. Around 8 o'clock, Caroline walked into the kitchen wearing slippers and a sweater. At first, she looked confused, then slowly. Her expression changed, not anger. She stared at the crowded kitchen counters covered in dishes and ingredients. "Margaret," she said. I smiled warmly. "Happy Thanksgiving," but she didn't smile back right away. "You started cooking already?" I nodded gently. "I wanted to help." She rubbed her forehead softly, and that was when I felt it again, that invisible wall between us. "Margaret," she said carefully, "I thought we talked about keeping things simple this year." The words hit me harder than they probably should have, because suddenly, I felt foolish standing there in my apron like some older woman trying too hard to hold onto the past. "I was only trying to make things nice," I whispered. "I know," she answered quickly. "I just already had plans." The kitchen became painfully quiet. I looked down at my hands, old hands, shaking slightly over a bowl of pie filling. And for the first time, I truly saw myself through her eyes, not as Andrew's mother, not as someone carrying family traditions, just an extra person is taking over her kitchen, her holiday, her home. At that exact moment, Andrew walked downstairs. He immediately sensed the tension. "What's wrong?" he asked carefully. Caroline stepped back slightly. "Nothing, I'm just overwhelmed." I forced a quick smile. "It's fine, sweetheart." Everything's fine, but it wasn't fine, not really, because something inside me cracked that morning, deeply, like glass breaking without sound. The rest of the day felt uncomfortable. Everyone tried pretending things were normal. The children watched cartoons in the living room. Football was played softly on television. Family members arrived carrying desserts and flowers, and through it all, I smiled. I laughed when expected. I passed plates around the table. But inside, I felt myself disappearing. At dinner, Andrew asked me to say the prayer. My heart nearly broke right there, because part of me still wanted to feel included, still wanted to believe I belonged, so I bowed my head slowly. "Lord, thank you for family, thank you for the grace, and thank you for giving us love even during difficult seasons." My voice trembled near the end. I do not think anyone noticed except Caroline for a brief second. I saw guilt flash across her face. Then the moment passed. Dinner continued. Conversation continued. Life continued. But something inside me had already changed forever. After dessert, I quietly carried dishes into the kitchen alone. The sink filled with warm water while laughter echoed from the living room. And suddenly, I realized nobody had followed me. Nobody noticed I disappeared again. That feeling, that unbearable feeling of invisibility, came rushing back stronger than ever. Then it happened. The moment I still think about sometimes late at night. I walked toward the hallway carrying clean plates when I overheard Caroline talking softly to her sister. She sounded exhausted. "I know she means well," Caroline whispered, "but sometimes it feels like she still thinks this is her house." I stopped walking immediately. My entire body went cold. Because those words touched the exact wound I had spent months trying to hide. I stood there frozen in the hallway, holding those plates against my chest while my heart shattered. Not because Caroline hated me, she didn't. Not because she wanted to hurt me, she didn't. It hurt because deep down, part of me feared she was right. I had been trying to hold onto a role that no longer belonged to me. I still moved through the house like a mother trying to take care of everyone, but this was not my home anymore. It was theirs, and maybe, without realizing it, I had made Caroline feel like a guest inside her own life. That realization hurt more than anger ever could. I stepped outside onto the back porch. Cold November air hit my face immediately. The yard was dark except for the porch light glowing behind me. I wrapped my sweater tighter around myself and finally, I let myself cry, not politely, real tears, the kind that comes from exhaustion more than sadness. I covered my mouth, nobody inside would hear me. And through trembling breaths, I whispered something I never thought I would say aloud. Lord, I don't know how to disappear gracefully. A few minutes later, the back door opened softly. Andrew stepped outside. Mom, I wiped my face quickly. I'm okay. But mothers never stop being mothers, and sons who truly love you, they still recognize pain in your voice. Andrew sat beside me quietly. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then finally he asked, "Have you been unhappy here?" I stared out into the darkness, and for the first time in months, I stopped pretending. "Yes," I whispered. My voice cracked immediately. "I feel like I don't belong anywhere anymore." Andrew looked completely heartbroken. "No, Mom," but I gently shook my head. "It's nobody's fault," I told him softly. "That's what makes it harder." Tears filled his eyes. And suddenly, I realized something painful. My son was trapped between two people he loved, his wife, his mother, and no matter what he did, someone was hurting. That night changed everything, because after months of silence, the truth had finally entered the room, and once truth is spoken aloud, a family can either fall apart completely or finally begin healing. But at that moment, sitting beside my son under that cold porch light, I, somewhere inside me, did not know which future awaited us. After Thanksgiving, something inside me changed, not suddenly, not dramatically, like a candle growing dim little by little. I stopped trying so hard after that night. I still smiled during dinner, still thanked Caroline for the meals, still hugged the children before school, but deep inside, I felt tired in a way I had never felt before, not physically, spiritually, emotionally, the kind of tiredness that settles into your heart when you no longer know where you fit in the world. I think many older people understand this feeling. You spend your whole life being needed, as a parent, as a spouse, as the person everyone depends on. Then one day, the phone rings less, the house grows quieter, and slowly, you begin wondering who you are when nobody truly needs you anymore. That question haunted me constantly, especially at night. Some evenings, I sat by the window watching cars pass outside while the rest of the house carried on without me. I could hear laughter from the living room, television sounds. The children are arguing over cartoons, normal family life, and somehow, that normal life made me feel even lonelier because I was close enough to hear it, but too far away to fully belong inside it. One night, I found myself staring at an old photograph of Thomas for nearly an hour. It was taken in our Savannah living room many years ago. He was sitting in his rocking chair, smiling at me as he held a cup of coffee. Simple moment, simple life, but when I looked at that picture, I realized something painful. Thomas had always made me feel seen. Even during ordinary moments, especially during ordinary moments, and after losing that kind of love, everything else felt colder. I started looking through old photo albums almost every day after that, birthdays, Christmas mornings, family vacations. Andrew, a little boy, is asleep on Thomas's chest, pictures of me younger, smiling without effort. Sometimes I barely recognized that woman anymore, not because I looked older, but because loneliness changes your face, your eyes, your spirit. One afternoon, Emma wandered into my room while I was holding those photo albums. She climbed onto the bed beside me. Children have a way of sensing the sadness that adults try to hide. "Who's that?" she asked, pointing to an old picture. "That's Grandpa Thomas," I whispered. Emma smiled softly. "Mommy says he was funny." I laughed gently through tears. "Oh, he was very funny." Emma leaned her little head against my shoulder. Then suddenly she asked, "Grandma, why do you look sad all the time?" Children ask questions that adults are too afraid to ask. For a second, I could not answer because the hardest part was I did not fully understand my sadness myself. I only knew my heart felt heavy everywhere I went. I kissed the top of Emma's head gently. "Sometimes grown-ups miss people very deeply," I told her softly. Emma wrapped her tiny arms around me, and for one small moment, I felt comfort again, real comfort, not because my problems disappeared, but because a child reminded me I was still capable of being loved. That evening after dinner, I overheard Caroline talking on the phone in the kitchen. Her voice sounded exhausted again. "I'm trying," she whispered. "I just feel pressure all the time now." I walked away before hearing more, because something inside me had finally started understanding her pain too. And the hardest part was, that realization made everything even sadder. Caroline was not a cruel woman. She was overwhelmed, tired, trying to balance work, children, marriage, and now a grieving widow living under her roof. And maybe every time Andrew complimented my cooking, every time the children ran to me first, every time old family traditions entered her home, maybe she felt replaced too. That thought stayed with me all night. Two women, both lonely, both insecure. Both are trying to hold on to their place in the same family. And somehow, neither of us knew how to talk about it. The hardest part was, a few days later, Caroline knocked softly on my bedroom door. I looked up from my Bible. "Come in," she stepped inside carefully, almost nervously. "I made tea," she said. I nodded. "Thank you." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then finally, she sat down across from me, and what she said next surprised me completely. "I think you hate me sometimes." I stared at her in complete shock. "Hate you?" I whispered. Caroline looked down at her hands. "I always feel like I'm failing around you." My heart sank immediately, because all this time, I thought she wanted me gone, but maybe she had been carrying her own fear all along. "I could never hate you," I said softly. Tears filled Caroline's eyes almost instantly. "You raised Andrew so well," she whispered. "Sometimes I feel like I can never measure up to the kind of mother you were." Her voice cracked near the end, and suddenly, I no longer saw a difficult daughter-in-law. I saw a tired woman silently comparing herself to impossible expectations. A woman trying desperately to be enough, just like I once did when I was younger. That realization softened something inside me, not completely. Pain does not disappear in one conversation. But compassion entered the room where resentment had been living, and compassion changes people. That night after Caroline left my room, I sat quietly holding my Bible against my chest. Then I whispered something through tears. "Lord, maybe we're both hurting more than we know." And for the first time in months, I did not feel angry anymore, just sad for both of us, because families rarely fall apart from hatred alone. Sometimes they slowly drift through misunderstanding, while everyone silently waits to feel loved again. I wish I could say healing happened immediately after that conversation, but healing is rarely quick. December arrived gently that year. Cold mornings, warm blankets, soft Christmas music drifting through the house, and for the first time in many months, the heaviness inside our home felt a little lighter, not gone, just softer. Like everyone had grown tired of carrying tension. After my conversation with Caroline, we both became more careful with each other. Kinder, not forced kindness, real effort. Small things started changing. She began asking for my recipes again. I stopped correcting little household things without realizing it. And Andrew finally stopped pretending everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. That alone changed the atmosphere inside them, because silence can wound families deeply. But honesty opens doors, and healing can finally walk through. One evening, Caroline asked if I would help decorate Christmas cookies with the children. At first, I almost said no, not because I didn't want to, but because loneliness teaches you to expect rejection before it happens. Still, I joined them at the kitchen table. Emma covered everything in too much frosting. Jacob kept sneaking candy when he thought nobody noticed. And Caroline laughed for the first time in weeks. A real laugh, not the polite kind. And hearing that laughter inside the house again, it reminded me of older Christmases back in Savannah. Back when Thomas filled every room with warmth. For a few precious moments, things felt normal, not perfect, but peaceful. Then suddenly, while rolling cookie dough, Caroline looked over at me and smiled softly. "You know," she said, "Andrew still talks about your Christmas dinners like they were magical." I laughed gently. "Oh, they weren't magical. They were to him," she whispered. Something about the sadness in her voice caught my attention. I looked at her carefully, and finally, I asked the question sitting between us for months. "Caroline, why do you always seem nervous around me?" The room became still. Even the children wandered into the living room, leaving just the two of us standing there in the kitchen. For a moment, Caroline said nothing. Then finally, her eyes filled with tears. "Because I feel like I'm constantly being compared to you," she admitted. Her voice trembled badly, and suddenly, everything became painfully clear. All the tension, all the discomfort, all the distance between us. It wasn't hatred, it was fear. Caroline leaned against the counter and wiped her eyes quickly. "You were the kind of mother everyone admires," she whispered. "The kind of wife people respected. Andrew talks about your holidays, your cookings, your traditions, and sometimes I feel like no matter what I do, I'll never be enough." My heart broke completely hearing those words, because all this time, I thought she wanted to replace me, but the truth was far sadder. She thought she could never live up to me, and honestly, neither of us had realized how much pressure Andrew's memories carried inside the home. I slowly sat down at the kitchen table, and she realized then in months. I truly saw Caroline clearly, not as the woman who made me feel unwanted, but as another human being. She was softly afraid of failing the people she loved. I reached for her hand gently. "Oh, sweetheart," I whispered. "You were never supposed to become me." Caroline started crying harder after that, not loud, not dramatic, just exhausted tears. The kind woman cries after holding too much inside for too long. "I try so hard," she whispered. "And sometimes I feel like this house remembers you better than it remembers me." That sentence stayed with me deeply, because in many ways, she was right. Andrew carried our old family memories everywhere. And maybe without realizing it, he had kept placing the past beside Caroline in ways that felt unfair. Comparisons can damage love, even unintentional comparisons. That night after the children went to sleep, Andrew came downstairs and found both of us sitting at the kitchen table. He looked nervous immediately. "What happened?" Caroline laughed softly through tears. We finally told the truth. Andrew sat down slowly beside us, and that was the moment in many months. The three of us spoke honestly, really honestly. Andrew admitted he had been avoiding difficult conversations because he feared hurting both of us. Caroline admitted she often felt insecure and overwhelmed, and I admitted something I had been too ashamed to say aloud before. "I think after your father died, I forgot how to exist without taking care of people." Andrew's eyes filled with tears immediately. Because finally he understood my constant help, my cooking, my cleaning, my involvement in everything. It wasn't about control, it was grief. When you lose the person you built your entire life around, you search desperately for purpose again, and sometimes, without realizing it, you try to hold on to old roles because they are the only identity you still recognize. That was my truth. I wasn't trying to take over Caroline's home. I was trying to survive my loneliness. Andrew reached for my hand slowly. "Mom, I should have seen how lost you were." I shook my head gently. "No, sweetheart. I hid it well, and older women do hide pain well. We smile through heartbreak. We comfort others while without looking up falling apart ourselves. We become experts at surviving silently." That conversation lasted nearly 3 hours. No yelling, no blaming, just honesty. And honesty did something beautiful that night. It removed the masks we had all been wearing. Caroline was no longer the cold daughter-in-law in my mind. I was no longer the unwanted burden in hers. And Andrew was no longer trapped between two impossible sides. It suddenly became clear. We became a family of human beings instead of silent expectations. Before bed that night, Caroline hugged me tightly in the hallway. A real hug, not polite, not forced. And she whispered, "I never wanted you to feel unwanted here." Tears filled my eyes immediately, because sometimes those are the exact words a hurting heart has been waiting months to hear. Later that night, I sat alone beside the Christmas tree after everyone went to sleep. The house glowed softly in the darkness, and as I looked at those warm lights, I realized something important. Love alone does not hold families together. Understanding does, grace does, honesty does, and maybe that difficult season had not destroyed our family after all. Maybe it was teaching all of us how to love each other differently. But life still had one more lesson waiting for me, a lesson about identity, purpose, and learning how to belong again without losing myself completely. After that long conversation at the kitchen table, something inside our family slowly began to heal. Not overnight, not perfectly. Healing rarely happens that way, but the house felt different now, lighter somehow. Like everyone could finally breathe again. That was the moment in months. I stopped waking up with that heavy feeling sitting on my chest, the feeling that I needed to stay small and invisible to keep the peace inside the house. And Caroline. She stopped looking nervous every time I entered a room. There was still awkwardness sometimes. Of course there was. Pain leaves behind tenderness, but now there was understanding too, and understanding changes the way people speak to each other, the way they look at each other, the way they love each other. One cold morning, I was sitting in the living room holding my coffee when Caroline walked downstairs. Normally, she rushed through mornings stressed and distracted, but this time she sat beside me on the couch. "You're up early again," she smiled softly. "Old habits," I gently. For a moment, we sat there watching snow fall outside the window, and strangely, the silence no longer felt uncomfortable. It felt peaceful. That may sound like a small thing, but after months of tension, peaceful silence felt like a miracle. A few days later, Caroline surprised me. "Would you like to come shopping with me?" she asked one afternoon. At first, I almost refused out of habit. Loneliness teaches people to expect exclusion, but something in her voice felt sincere, so I nodded, and honestly, that little shopping trip became one of the most important moments of my healing. As we walked through the grocery store together, we talked about simple things, recipes, winter weather, the children's school projects, nothing deep, nothing emotional, just ordinary conversation, and somehow, that ordinary conversation mattered more than either of us realized, because real healing often begins in ordinary moments. At one point, Caroline held up a watermelon and laughed. "Andrew says you can tell if these are good just by tapping them." I smiled. "Well, your husband exaggerates a little." She laughed softly again. "And hearing that laughter beside me instead of across from me made my heart ache most gently. After shopping, Caroline surprised me even more. Instead of driving home immediately, she pulled into a small coffee shop parking lot. "Thought we could sit for a minute," she said. We found seats beside the window while soft music played in the background. Snow drifted slowly outside, and a truth settled into her heart. Caroline spoke openly about her life. She told me how often she felt overwhelmed trying to balance everything. Work, motherhood, marriage, the pressure of always trying to do enough, be enough. And suddenly, I saw pieces of my younger self inside her. Because women carry so much silently, especially mothers, especially wives, especially the ones trying desperately not to fail the people they love. "I think I've been scared ever since you moved in," Caroline admitted softly. I looked at her. "Scared of what?" She stared down at her coffee cup before answering. "Scared Andrew would realize I could never create the kind of home you did." That sentence broke my heart all over again. Not because it hurt me, because it hurt her. Nobody should feel like they are competing with memories, especially memories built over 40 years of marriage and motherhood. I reached across the table and gently touched her hand. "Oh, Caroline," I whispered, "you don't need to become me to be loved by this family." Her eyes filled with tears immediately, and honestly, mine did too. That afternoon changed something important between us for the first time. We stopped trying to protect ourselves from each other and started protecting each other instead. There is a difference, a very big difference. Around that same time, I started volunteering at church again, nothing major. Just helping organize donation boxes and greeting people during community dinners. But slowly, I began remembering parts of myself that existed outside motherhood, outside grief, outside loneliness. One older woman at church hugged me tightly one afternoon and said, "You have such a calming presence." I nearly cried hearing that because for months, I had only seen myself as a burden, a problem, an interruption. But maybe God still had a purpose for me after all, even at 72 years old. That realization healed something deep inside me, because many older people lose themselves after their children grow up. We spend decades caring for everyone else, then one day, the role changes, and suddenly we no longer recognize who we are without it. That was what I had truly been grieving all along, not only Thomas. Not only my old home, I was grieving the version of myself that no longer existed. One evening, Emma and Jacob climbed onto the couch beside me while I was knitting. "Grandma," Jacob asked suddenly, "are you happier now?" Children notice more than adults realize. I smiled softly. "I think I'm learning how to be." Emma leaned her head against my shoulder. "Good," she whispered, and in that moment, I realized something beautiful. Belonging does not always mean being needed constantly. Sometimes belonging means being loved honestly, even during change, even during imperfect seasons. As weeks passed, the house slowly became warmer emotionally. Andrew laughed more. Caroline looked less exhausted, and I stopped feeling like I needed permission to exist inside the home. Still, a quiet truth had begun settling into my heart, a truth I was not ready to say aloud yet. As much as we loved each other, maybe living together forever was not the answer. Maybe healing also meant learning how to stand on my own again. And honestly, that realization frightened me almost as much as loneliness itself, because after losing Thomas, the idea of building a life for myself again felt impossible. But life has a way of gently pushing us toward growth, even when we are afraid, and soon, a small handwritten letter waiting outside my bedroom door would change everything once again. By the time spring arrived, the coldness inside our family had mostly faded, not completely. There were still awkward moments sometimes, moments where old emotions returned for a second, but now, we knew how to speak through them rather than hide from them, and honestly, that changed everything. One morning, I woke earlier than usual. The house was still quiet. I slipped on my sweater and slowly opened the bedroom door, careful not to wake anyone. That was when I noticed it. A folded envelope was sitting neatly on the floor beside my door. At first, I thought maybe one of the children had left a drawing there, but when I picked it up, I recognized Caroline's handwriting immediately. My heart tightened, not from fear exactly, just emotion, because sometimes handwritten letters carry truths people struggle to say aloud. I sat slowly on the edge of the bed before opening it. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. Inside, the letter was simple. No fancy words, no dramatic apology, just honesty, and somehow, that made it even more powerful. It said, "Margaret, I've started this letter many times in my head, but I never knew how to say everything properly. I know this past year has been painful for both of us, and I know there were moments when I made you feel unwanted in our home. I am deeply sorry for that. The truth is, I was carrying insecurities I didn't fully understand myself. You raised a wonderful son, you built a warm family, you created traditions filled with love, and instead of appreciating that, sometimes I compared myself to it and became afraid I would never be enough, but I want you to know something honestly. You matter here, not because of cooking, not because of cleaning, not because of what you do for us. You matter because you are family, and I hope someday our home feels safe for your heart again. Thank you for loving us even when things became difficult. Love, Caroline. By the time I finished reading, my vision was blurred with tears. Not loud crying, just deep emotions slowly rising from places inside me that have been hurting for a very long time. Because acknowledgement heals people, sometimes more than apologies, sometimes more than solutions. Being seen, being understood can heal wounds silence kept open for months. I carefully folded the letter and pressed it against my chest. Then slowly, I opened Thomas's old Bible sitting on my nightstand. Inside were old photographs, church notes, and one faded letter Thomas had written me years ago. I placed Caroline's letter beside his, two completely different kinds of love, yet somehow both remind me of the same thing. I still mattered. That morning, I sat beside the living room window for nearly an hour watching sunlight move across the floor. And that was the moment since Thomas died. My heart felt calm, not because life became perfect, but because the loneliness no longer felt invisible. Someone had finally named it. Someone had finally reached toward it instead of avoiding it. Later that afternoon, Caroline came home from work carrying grocery bags. The moment she saw me sitting in the living room, she looked nervous, like she wasn't sure how I would react after reading the letter. I stood slowly, walked toward her, and without saying a word, I hugged her, a real hug. The kind where pain softens between two people. I felt her body shake slightly as she hugged me back. And softly, almost like a child, she whispered, "I didn't want us to keep hurting each other." Neither did I. That evening, we cooked dinner together, not because anyone expected us to, not because we were trying to force healing. It just happened naturally. Caroline chopped vegetables while I prepared biscuits. Soft music played in the background. Children laughed in the living room, and for the first time in a long while, the house finally felt peaceful again. At one point, Caroline smiled at me and laughed softly. Andrew was right about your cinnamon rolls. I laughed too. Well, it took me 30 years to get them right, and somehow, that tiny conversation carried more healing than months of silence ever could. That night after dinner, Andrew pulled me aside in the hallway. "You seem lighter," he said softly. I smiled. I think my heart finally stopped fighting. He looked confused for a second, so I explained gently. When people feel unseen long enough, they start protecting themselves from more pain. But eventually, protecting your heart too much becomes its own kind of loneliness. Andrew nodded slowly. And then he hugged me the same way he used to when he was little, tightly, like he never wanted me to doubt again. Over the next few weeks, life settled into something calmer, healthier. I stopped constantly trying to prove my usefulness. Caroline stopped feeling threatened by my presence, and Andrew finally stopped carrying the weight of keeping everyone emotionally separated. But perhaps the biggest change happened inside me. I slowly began understanding something important. Growing older is not about holding onto old roles forever. It is about learning how to love people differently as life changes. That lesson took me a long time to understand. One Sunday afternoon, I took a long walk alone around the neighborhood. Flowers had started blooming again. Children rode bicycles through nearby streets. And warm spring air moved gently through the trees. As I walked, I realized something surprising. That was the moment since Thomas died. The future no longer frightened me quite as much, because somewhere along the way, I had stopped feeling completely alone. Still, deep down, I knew another decision was waiting ahead. A difficult one, a necessary one, because even though our family had begun healing, my heart was slowly realizing something important. Love sometimes needs closeness, but sometimes, love also needs a healthy space to grow peacefully. And the choice I would soon make about my future, it would change all of our lives once again. By the beginning of summer, life inside the house felt very different from the painful months before. The tension was gone. The careful walking around of emotions was gone too. Now there was softness, patience, understanding, and honesty. I think all of us have changed. Caroline no longer looked uncomfortable when I entered the kitchen. Andrew stopped carrying that constant worried expression on his face, and I stopped feeling like I needed permission to exist still. There was a quiet truth growing inside me every single day, a truth I could no longer ignore. As much as we loved each other now, I needed to build a life that belonged to me again, not the old life from Savannah. That season was over, but something new, something peaceful, something where I could stand on my own feet emotionally again. One evening, I sat alone on the back porch watching the sunset while warm wind moved through the trees, and suddenly, I heard Thomas's voice in my memory so clearly. "Maggie, don't stop living just because life changed." He used to say things like that whenever I became afraid of new seasons in life. Back then, I never realized how much courage those simple words would one day require. That night after dinner, I asked Andrew and Caroline if we could talk. Immediately, both of them looked nervous. I almost laughed seeing it. Nothing bad, I promised gently. We sat together in the living room while the children played upstairs. The evening sunlight filled the room softly, and for a moment, I just looked at them, my son, my daughter-in-law. Two people who had once felt so emotionally far away from me, now sitting beside me peacefully. Life is strange that way. Finally, I took a slow breath. I've been thinking about getting a small apartment nearby, I said softly. The room became completely still. Andrew blinked immediately. Mom, why? His voice sounded hurt, and honestly, that nearly broke my heart, because months earlier, I feared he no longer wanted me around. Now I could see he feared losing me again. I reached for his hand gently. Sweetheart, this isn't me leaving because I'm unhappy. I smiled softly toward Caroline, too. This home helped heal me. Tears instantly filled Caroline's eyes. But, she whispered, I looked down for a moment before answering. But I think we all deserve room to breathe again. Nobody spoke for several seconds. Then finally, Andrew asked softly, Are you sure this is what you want? And suddenly became clear in a very long while, I answered honestly, yes, because deep inside, I finally understood something important. Healing did not mean returning to who I used to be. It meant becoming someone new without losing the love that still connected us. A few weeks later, we found a small apartment only 10 minutes away from their house. Nothing fancy. Just a quiet little place with soft beige walls, a tiny kitchen, and a living room window that faced a row of maple trees. The first time I walked inside, I stood quietly in the middle of the empty room, and instead of sadness, I felt peace, not loneliness, not fear, peace. Caroline helped me pick curtains. Emma insisted I needed yellow pillows because Grandma likes happy colors. Jacob carried boxes much too heavy for him while pretending to be the man of the house, and Andrew assembled furniture while complaining the entire time, just like his father used to. That realization made me smile through tears. Some pieces of love truly survive from generation to generation. The night before my official move, Caroline knocked softly on my bedroom door. You awake? She asked. I smiled gently. Come in. She sat beside me for a moment. Then suddenly she whispered, I'm going to miss you being here. My eyes filled immediately, because those words healed wounds she never even fully knew existed. I squeezed her hand gently. We're still family, I reminded her softly. She nodded through tears, I know, and this time, we both truly believed it. Moving day felt emotional in ways I never expected, not heartbreaking, just meaningful. As Andrew carried my final box to the car, I looked around the guest room one last time. The room that once felt lonely, uncertain, painful, now carried memories of healing too. Funny how places change when hearts change. That first night alone in my apartment, I expected grief to return full force. I expected silence to crush me again, but instead, the quiet felt different this time. Gentle, restful, I unpacked slowly. Placed family photos on shelves, set Thomas's Bible beside the lamp, and finally sat down near the window with a cup of tea. Outside, evening rain tapped softly against the glass, and suddenly, I realized something beautiful. I had survived, not perfectly, not gracefully every moment, but faithfully. For months, I believed my value depended on being needed constantly. As a wife, as a mother, as a caretaker, but now, for the very first time, I understood that my life still carried meaning even in quiet seasons. Even alone, even older, God had not forgotten me simply because my role changed. A few days later, the grandchildren visited my apartment for the first time. Emma immediately ran into the living room, smiling. Grandma, this place smells like cookies already, I laughed. Well, some things never change. Jacob pointed proudly at my bookshelf. You made it look cozy, and hearing that word, cozy, made my heart swell unexpectedly, because for the first time since leaving Savannah, I finally felt like I had a home again. Not the old home, not the life I lost, but something new, something built from healing instead of fear. That Sunday, the whole family came over for dinner. Caroline helped me cook. Andrew brought flowers. The children filled the apartment with noise and laughter, and as I stood there looking around the table, I realized we had finally found balance, not through perfection, not through pretending nobody was hurt, but through honesty, compassion, and grace. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat quietly beside the window holding a warm cup of tea. And suddenly became clear in years. I no longer asked myself where I belonged, because now I knew I belonged wherever love remained honest, where kindness remained gentle, and where people chose understanding over pride. But there was still one final truth life wanted to teach me, a truth about forgiveness, about aging, and about the quiet beauty of learning to love changing seasons instead of fearing them. Today, as I sit here telling this story, I am 72 years old, and life feels very different now. Slower, quieter, softer somehow. The apartment is peaceful tonight. Thomas Thomas's old Bible still sits beside my favorite chair. The grandchildren's drawings cover my refrigerator, and there's a warm little blanket folded neatly across the couch because Emma insists every cozy house needs blankets. Funny how children bring warmth into places grief once made cold. If someone had told me a year earlier that peace would eventually return to my life, I do not think I would have believed them, because there was a time I truly thought loneliness would swallow me whole. A time I believed growing older meant becoming less important, less needed, less seen. But I understand something differently now. Aging is not the end of love. It is simply the beginning of a different kind of love. These days, Andrew calls me almost every evening on his drive home from work. Sometimes we talk for 20 minutes, sometimes only 5. But now, I no longer measure love by how often people need me. I measure it by presence, consistency, care, and Caroline. Oh, life softened beautifully between us. Now she sends me recipes she wants to try, calls me when she feels overwhelmed. Sometimes she even sits in my apartment kitchen, drinking tea while the children play in the living room. And now and then, she hugs me before leaving and says softly, "I'm glad you're close." Those words still heal something inside me every single time. Not because I needed to win her love, but because understanding finally replaced fear between us. And honestly, that changed everything. One Sunday afternoon, the whole family gathered at my apartment after church. The living room was full of noise. Emma is coloring on the floor. Jacob is arguing with Andrew about football. Caroline is helping me carry dishes into the kitchen. And for a moment, I stood there quietly watching all of them. Watching this family that nearly drifted apart emotionally. This family survived a misunderstanding, silence, loneliness, and grief. My eyes filled with tears suddenly. Not sad tears, grateful ones. Healing is a beautiful thing when people choose it. Later that evening, after everyone left, I sat alone near the window watching the sunset disappear behind the trees. And I thought about all the versions of myself I had been throughout life. Young Margaret, wife Margaret, mother Margaret. Widow Margaret, lonely Margaret, and now, this version, a woman learning how to age with grace instead of fear. A woman finally understands that her value was never tied only to what she could do for others. That lesson took me a lifetime to learn. For so long, I believed love meant sacrifice without limits. Constant giving, constantly helping, constantly holding everyone together. But now I understand something gentle. Real love also allows people room to grow, room to breathe, room to become who they are meant to be, even inside families, especially inside families. Sometimes I still miss Thomas deeply, especially during quiet evenings. I miss his laugh, his steady voice, the way he always made every room feel safe. But now when I think about him, the pain feels softer, warmer somehow, because I know he would be proud of us. Proud that bitterness did not destroy this family. Proud that we chose honesty instead of silence. Proud that grace stayed stronger than pride. And if there is one thing I hope this story leaves inside your heart, it is this. Families do not usually break apart all at once. Most of the time, they drift apart through assumptions, unspoken fears, loneliness nobody knows how to explain. But healing also happens, one conversation at a time. One apology at a time, one act of compassion at a time. If someone older in your family seems distant, please be patient with them. Sometimes aging feels invisible in ways younger people cannot yet understand. And if you are someone growing older like me, please remember this. Your value did not disappear simply because your role changed. You still matter. Your wisdom matters. Your kindness matters. Your presence matters more than you know tonight. As I finish telling this story, I no longer ask myself where I belong, because now I understand something beautiful. Home is not only a place. Home is where love makes room for your heart, even during difficult seasons. Even after misunderstandings, even after tears, and sometimes, the people who once made you feel unwanted can become the very people who help your heart feel safe again. Before I go, I want to leave you with one final thought. Please do not wait too long to speak gently to the people you love. Pride creates distance. Silence creates loneliness, but kindness can heal wounds people carry for years. Sometimes, late at night, I still remember standing alone on that cold porch whispering through tears, "Lord, where does a mother go when her children no longer need her?" Now I finally know the answer. She does not disappear. She learns how to love differently. She learns how to keep living, and if her heart stays soft enough, life may still surprise her with healing she never thought possible. Final message to our beautiful audience, dear friends. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for sitting with me and listening to this emotional life story. If this story touched your heart even a little, I hope it reminds you to hold your family closer, speak more gently, and never let silence grow bigger than love. Sometimes the people around us are carrying pain we cannot see. A little patience can completely change someone's life. And to every mother, father, grandmother, or grandfather listening today, please remember this: you are not forgotten. You are not invisible, and your love still matters deeply. every son, daughter, husband, wife, or grandchild listening, please take care of the hearts that once cared for yours. One warm word can stay with a person forever. Did this story touch your heart? Which city are you listening from today? I would truly love to meet you in the comments. Please subscribe and stay connected for our next emotional journey together. Until next time, take care of your heart with love, warmth, and respect. See you again in the next life story.